to Britain. That's important.
We'll have a report from the campaign where one would-be Tory candidate told a hustings that Britain should adopt a points-based system for immigrants from the EU. The number of rape allegations recorded by police in England and Wales has reached the highest on record. European stock markets have fallen sharply for a second day amid worries about a global economic downturn. After Lord Freud's comments about some disabled people not being worth the minimum wage, we look at the issue of unemployment amongst people with disabilities.
It's been very, very difficult. I was getting up in the morning wondering, well, what am I going to do today? It's always nice to get back into work and to have a reason to get up in the morning.
And how the Ebola outbreak has affected the Sierra Leone diaspora community in the UK.
Georgia sadly died 3 weeks ago because of Ebola. She was a nurse at one of the hospitals, and so many of us have been tragically affected by the whole situation.
I'll also be talking to the author Aminata Fauna on the threat of Ebola to West Africa. The BBC News is read by Zeb Soanes.
David Cameron has said that further action is needed to establish more effective control of migration, amid reports that he's considering a range of options to limit the number of EU job seekers entering the UK. Speaking in Kent on a campaign visit ahead of next month's by-election in Rochester and Stroud, the Prime Minister said he wanted one last attempt at negotiating a better deal with the European Union. Reports have suggested that Mr Cameron is looking at a so-called emergency brake mechanism to curb the number of migrants coming to Britain. Here's our political correspondent, Robin Brandt.
The Prime Minister was campaigning in Rochester, where the Tories are facing another UKIP threat as they try to hold the seat in next month's by-election. David Cameron hinted at tougher measures to try to limit the number of people coming to live and work in the UK from the rest of Europe, but there was no detail. It's clear, though, he wants to go beyond restrictions already in place on welfare payments. There's been speculation he may ask for what's called an emergency brake to try to limit the numbers or try to negotiate with individual EU countries. The Prime Minister said it was worth having one last go at negotiating a better deal. A spokeswoman for the European Commission stressed that free movement of workers is a fundamental principle in the EU enshrined in the treaty. Anna Firth, one of the women hoping to be the Conservative candidate in next month's by-election, has suggested that immigrants from inside the EU should only be allowed to come here if they have the skills the country needs or they have a lot of money.
Labour is demanding that the Welfare Reform Minister, Lord Freud, go to Parliament to explain his controversial comments that some disabled workers are not worth the minimum wage. The Tory peer offered a full apology yesterday for what he acknowledged had been foolish and offensive remarks. The Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, has said they were deeply distressing and had touched a raw nerve. The number of rape allegations reported to and recorded by police in England and Wales has reached a record high. It's thought to reflect a greater willingness among victims to come forward rather than an increase in criminality. However, one particular offence, rape at knife point, is growing. Our Home Affairs correspondent Danny Shaw reports.
In the 12 months to the end of June, there were more than 22,000 rape allegations recorded by police. That's a 29% year-on-year rise and the highest number on record. Statisticians say the increase reflects improved police counting methods after criticism that reports of rape were being removed from the data. A greater willingness by victims to come forward is also likely to be a factor after the Jimmy Savile affair and Operation Yewtree. But experts say there's been a genuine rise in knife-point rapes. 294 were recorded, the causes of which are not yet clear. Overall, the downward trend in crime, which started in the mid-1990s, is continuing. The Separate Crime Survey, which includes offences that aren't reported, estimates that crime fell 16%, though the figures do not include fraud, which is on the rise.
The World Health Organization has said a major outbreak of Ebola in the United States or Western Europe is very unlikely. France is to introduce screening of passengers arriving from one of the worst affected countries, Guinea, and EU health ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss further steps to stop the spread of the disease. 2 nurses have been infected in Texas, prompting President Obama to call for a more aggressive US response. Christopher Dye from the WHO told BBC News that Western medical systems could cope.
The possibility that once an infection has been introduced, that it spreads elsewhere is something that everybody is going to be concerned about. But like President Obama, we're confident that in North America and Western Europe, where healthcare systems are very strong, that we're very unlikely to see a major outbreak in any of those places.
A Kurdish commander defending the Syrian border town of Kobani says they've driven Islamic State militants out of almost all areas, bar 2 pockets of resistance on its eastern fringe. The Kurds, supported by American airstrikes, have been engaged in a desperate battle against the jihadists for a month. Stock markets have suffered sharp falls for the second day running amid persistent concerns about the strength of the global economy. The 100 share index, as well as the main markets in Germany and France, fell around 2%, mirroring falls in Asia overnight. Our business correspondent, Jonty Bloom, reports.
Stock markets around the world and across Europe have been hit by fears that economic growth is grinding to a halt. Worries about the Eurozone in particular have re-emerged, with Greek and Spanish government borrowing costs shooting up and the traditional powerhouse of Europe, Germany, looking increasingly weak. In America, the fear that the end of economic stimulus by the Federal Reserve is happening just when growth in Europe and China is stalling has hit the markets. So far today, the German DAX share index and the FTSE in London are down almost 2%. The CAC 40 in Paris is down over 2%, while on the international oil markets, the crude oil price has fallen below $83 a barrel.
A hospital in Surrey has apologised to 27 cancer patients after a panel of experts concluded that they had been harmed by their treatment. A review looked at the records of 1,200 people treated for bladder and prostate cancer at the East Surrey Hospital in Redhill. A urologist has been sacked and is being investigated by the General Medical Council, as Duncan Kennedy reports from the hospital.
Suspicions about Paul Miller were raised last November. He was suspended whilst an independent inquiry examined the records of 1,200 of his patients dating back to 2006. That review found that 27 of those patients, mostly elderly men with prostate or bladder cancer, had suffered harm through the care they received from Mr. Miller. 5 of the 27 died, although the hospital trust can't say if that was a direct result of the treatment they were given. The trust has apologised to those involved, some of whom have now begun legal proceedings.
Duncan Kennedy. To lose one seat to UKIP may count as misfortune. To lose 2 looks like carelessness. That's why David Cameron is visiting Kent today, leading a massive Conservative campaign to hold on to the constituency of Rochester and Strood. The Tory MP there, Mark Reckless, defected on the eve of the party conference. Today, the Prime Minister was keen to stress the government's record on tackling immigration.
We've already taken a lot of action, closing down bogus colleges, making sure people can't come and access benefits immediately, making sure that we're tougher on people who are here illegally and send them home. All of these changes are taking place, and of course it's one of the most important issues in this election.
But are there more policy moves afoot as a response to the threat from UKIP? One poll has them on 19%. The Conservatives are briefing that David Cameron is about to make a big announcement on European immigration. Our political correspondent Chris Mason is in Rochester. So what's being mooted, Chris?
Martha, the details might be thin, but one thing is clear. The language is really hardening. It's hardening fast. Number 10 seeks emergency curbs on migration, screams the Times today. Similar headline in The Sun. The Prime Minister's language in Rochester is punchy. There'll be one last go at renegotiating with the European Union, he said this morning. But the specifics are cloaked in a camouflage of ambiguity. What more could he achieve to limit the free movement of people in the EU while staying within the club? The European Commission says the free movement of people is sacrosanct, it's fundamental. All of which poses the big question, could the Prime Minister end up advocating leaving the EU in a referendum campaign if he wins the general election, as opposed to negotiating what he sees as a better deal and then making the case to stay in?
Now, of course, this is a pretty hot political issue, isn't it, in the constituency where you've been reporting on. And now one of the candidates there, a possible Conservative candidate, has gone much further than Tory official positions. Yeah, it gives you a sense of just how important this immigration issue is, as you say. Last night there was a hustings event for the 2 shortlisted Tories who want to be the Conservative candidate in Rochester and Strood. Local people can vote to pick the Tory candidate they want. It's called an open primary, but as we'll hear in a moment, I went along to listen but was actually banned from getting in. But I've heard a recording of what was said, and one of the candidates, Anna Firth, she's a barrister and councillor in Sevenoaks, she's up against Kelly Tolhurst, another local Conservative. Anna Firth went even further on immigration. I think we need, she said, the same immigration system for people
in the EU as outside the EU. Once we have that system in place, I think we will have a sensible immigration policy. In other words, she wants a points-based system for EU migration, something almost certainly incompatible with EU membership. What does this say about the Conservative Party today, said UKIP to me, that it gets its best lines from the UKIP manifesto? Conservative sources merely saying that the Prime Minister does put migration at the heart of his renegotiation with the EU. I spent yesterday, as I say, getting a feel for the mood in the North Kent constituency.
Hello, I'm George. We're in Strood at the minute, Rocky's gym, doing a ladies boxing class. Got the men's boxing class on after this, but yeah, the ladies are training hard.
Another week and already talk of another by-election. The political classes doing another round with the punters.
I've not yet known a single honest politician, so it's all just corrupt.
Never one?
No. They actually get voted in and then it becomes whatever they want it to be, not what is good for the community.
And now here's the killer question. How long have you been boxing? It looks fun.
About 2 years.
So you got a mean left hook, have you?
Do you want to try it? Do you want to try it?
Got to be careful what I wish for you, haven't I?
Yeah.
But make a quick exit. About a mile away from the sweat and panting of the gym, over the River Medway, is Rochester. The cathedral, a place of worship since 604 AD, stands tall over the string of independent shops that line the high street. One of the shops is now home to Mark Reckless, the former Tory MP for the town, now standing for UKIP. A poster in the window says, "Smile, you're on CCTV." It leaves the impression they're rather worried about someone throwing a brick in their direction. The mood here feels very different to Clacton, where support for UKIP felt rock solid. But there are still plenty for whom UKIP's tough language on immigration really resonates.
Whoever gets in here, they want to get rid of these foreigners. They're the biggest thieves and robbers in this town. And we have to give them national health when they get hurt. And we don't think it's right. Why bring them over here for us to help them when they rob our country?
What do you make of UKIP?
I don't care who gets in it as long as they sort it out. Our nurses are fighting now to get 1%, and they bring all these people and put them in hotels when we shouldn't be paying that money. They should give it to the nurses.
A few doors down is a bakery. The French radio station Nostalgie plays over the internet. It also had a poster in the window. This shop is run by 2 immigrants. "Leave your bigotry at the door," it read. Bruno Brier runs the bakery.
There were words from UKIP supporters which were not very pleasant about immigration, and since we are 2 immigrants operating this shop, we are wondering if this is the right place for us.
Makes you nervous to be here, does it?
It certainly makes us question whether it is the right place or not.
Last night, the Conservatives held the first public hustings event in what they call an open primary process for selecting their candidate here. Anyone could turn up, apparently, and hear the 2 shortlisted wannabes, and everyone in the constituency will get a postal vote to pick their favourite Tory candidate. But it turned out this open primary was closed to national journalists. Here you guys, we're from the BBC, here for the hustings.
We've been told.
We can't come in?
No, not today. It's an open primary because anybody in the constituency can vote, regardless of what political...
In Gosport we could come in, because I was there. So we can't even be in the building.
But what's wrong with your candidates, Rick? I looked online, they're very impressive.
They are.
Is there something about the word open we don't understand? Why can't we go in?
How unusual.
Because you're national newspapers.
I'm a member of the public.
We're not in Rochester and Kent.
So rather than observing this apparent festival of openness and accountability, I stood outside in the rain for 2 hours and was reduced to grabbing a word with people as they left. Hello sir, Chris Mason from the BBC. Was that a useful exercise? Interesting discussion?
Yeah, I think it was very useful actually. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Interesting to hear. I mean, one of the candidates is obviously very local knowledge, the other one a little bit more strength on some of the national. Yeah, they're down-to-earth people, which I like.
all credit. The people were very polite, the questioners were good, the panel were good, and it shows that people can take an active part in their local democracy and national democracy as well.
The Conservative MP Sarah Wollaston, herself selected in an open primary, spoke at the event and was up for a chat afterwards too.
Do you think it's right that the national media were banned from coming in and watching it?
Personally, I do think it was wrong that the national media were banned. I think that actually these things should be fully open to everybody, but that's not my choice.
Sarah Wollaston and, of course, Chris Mason did manage to find out exactly what happened inside the meeting. Now, once all the candidates are chosen, you'll be able to find a full list on the BBC's website. So how much will David Cameron change his line on Europe to win over voters in Kent and elsewhere? This does all mark a big shift. In the past, he warned against banging on about Europe. And in his early conference speeches as a leader, there was a very different sense of language on immigration. Take this attack on Gordon Brown from 2007.
Boy, has this guy got a plan. It's to appeal to that 4% of people in the marginal seats, with a dog whistle on immigration there, a word about crime here, wrap yourself up in the flag, talk about Britishness enough times, and maybe, just maybe, you'll convince enough people that that you are on their side. Well, I say, God, we've got to be better than that.
But with immigration rising up the list of voter concerns, David Cameron has been pushed into taking a tougher stance. Hear the change of tone at this year's party conference.
But we know the bigger issue today is migration from within the EU. Immediate access to our welfare system, paying benefits to families back at home, employment agencies signing up people from overseas, not recruiting here, numbers that have increased faster than we in this country wanted, and at a level that was too much for our communities and for our labour markets. All of this has to change, and it will be at the very heart of my renegotiation strategy for Europe. Britain, I know you want this sorted, so I will go to Brussels, I will not take no for an answer, and when it comes to free movement, I will get what Britain needs.
But how far will David Cameron go in toughening up his negotiating stance? The Sun reports today that he's going to draw a red line on the issue of immigration, accepting for the first time the possibility that the UK could leave the EU. The Prime Minister has always resisted making that threat. In fact, I pushed him on the point in an interview during the last European elections.
I think it's very important for people to know what the plan, what the strategy, what the aim is. That goes for the British people, but also I want my European partners to know I'm negotiating in good faith to make the changes that are in Britain's interest and Europe's interest, and then a referendum where I want, as I said, to see Britain stay in a reformed Europe. And I think you should go into these things with a positive, optimistic and clear view about what the outcome is that you see.
But you need a plan B, don't you?
Well, I'm very contented that I'm going to achieve Plan A, and I believe in firing everything you've got at achieving Plan A, and I don't see any reason why it can't be achieved.
David Cameron. Well, let's return now to Chris Mason, because we are seeing a significant shift, aren't we?
Yes, I think we are. I think we can visualise this, if you like, as a journey that David Cameron has gone on. He regularly talks with irritation about the regular journey he has to make from Downing Street to Brussels for summits. Well, let's have a look at the journey he's gone on since he's been Conservative leader, just as we've been hearing. It began 8 years ago, 1st of October 2006. He was new in office as leader of the opposition, and he used that line. We hear it so frequently repeated that he felt that the Tories had banged on about Europe and tax cuts had alienated voters. UKIP at the time, 2.2% of the vote in the 2005 general election, and that line that he used describing them as fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists. 6 years on, 2012, UKIP finding popularity not just in European Parliament elections but more generally, regularly polling over 10%. The Conservatives by then had really noticed. Fast forward to now, UKIP, as you were just nudging on, 19% in a YouGov poll today. Tories now talking about inheritance tax, talking about raising the threshold for the 40p rate of income tax, now headlines claiming emergency curbs on migration. David Cameron's European journey really has covered some distance.
Chris Mason, thank you. So would it be possible for the Prime Minister to get agreement within the European Union on plans for emergency brakes or a points-based system on immigration? Anand Menon is Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at King's College London. I asked him how much room David Cameron has when it comes to negotiations.
His room for manoeuvre, I think, is quite limited. There is provision in the treaty for emergency brakes on aspects of the single market, but they depend on emergency situations, and the European Commission has a say in whether emergency situations have arisen or not. So that will be tricky. And any straightforward limitation of the right of free movement of people in Europe will require a treaty change. And that's just not foreseeable, simply because so many other member states are opposed to any kind of treaty change.
So who would block it, do you think?
Well, a number of states. There are those states that have an interest in continued free movement. Any treaty change would require the agreement of countries like Bulgaria and Poland, whose nationals come here. But also another group of states who are scared of treaty change because they don't think they could get it through either their parliaments or a referendum at home. And here one thinks of France, where President Hollande is massively unpopular, and it's hard to see how he could win a referendum on an EU treaty.
But do other European countries share Britain's concerns about immigration?
To a certain extent, yes. I think if David Cameron were to limit his demands to curbing the right of migrants to claim benefits in the countries they go to, then he would find a degree of support amongst countries like Germany, yes.
But if he goes broader on the principle of freedom of movement, that's when the difficulties would start, in your opinion?
Absolutely, because I think virtually every other member state is deeply committed to the principle, or is deeply committed to not changing the principle at least.
But when you ask David Cameron about this, he's adamant that actually he has managed to secure concessions from the European Union in the past, and that he can find allies and he can push this through.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, and a lot will depend on his ability to finesse whatever he comes up with. But there's a big difference between reaching concessions on matters that can be done without treaty change, which in the case of limiting benefits might well be possible, and doing things that will require a change to the EU's founding treaties, which would be far, far more difficult, if not impossible.
Professor Anand Menon. Are we about to see the Eurozone crisis kick off again? Well, European stock markets have fallen sharply for a second day, and interest rates have risen sharply for government borrowing in Greece and Italy. Addressing the German parliament in Berlin today, Angela Merkel said that the Eurozone mustn't drop its guard.
The crisis is not yet permanently and sustainably over, because its root in regard to creating the European Economic and Monetary Union, as well as in regard to the situation of individual member states, is not yet eliminated.
Well, let's hear more about this now from Jeremy Warner. He's the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph and a columnist on economics and finance. Why this sudden panic?
It's not entirely clear why it's kicked off right now. I mean, normally these things are triggered by a particular event, and unless it be something like Ebola, there's no obvious reason for it. It is more a sort of a growing level of concern and worry that the whole European economy is sinking into a state of deflation, i.e. negative inflation rates, which is extremely harmful for already challenging debt dynamics in the region. On top of that, you've also had a series of political events. I mean, in Greece in particular, which caused the problem in the Eurozone, that caused the Euro's sort of existential crisis last time. You've got a state of growing political turmoil, with the main opposition party threatening to abandon the austerity programme. Once again, the monetary and fiscal straitjacket, which is kind of holding the whole single currency together, is in danger of being blown apart.
And fears about other European countries as well?
Yes, I mean, you've had a contagion into Spain, Italy in particular, where the protest Five Star movement, which is roughly a sort of equivalent of UKIP in the UK, has promised to hold a referendum on membership of the euro. All these concerns feed into this background of a steadily deteriorating economic situation, which Eurozone policy makers appear quite unable to do anything about.
And even more worryingly, it's not just the Eurozone, because we're seeing Asian markets affected too, with fears of a global downturn.
Yes, it's plain as a pikestaff now that China is very rapidly slowing, quite whether it's going to get on top of this problem or not is still open to question. But we've also, most worrying of all, had some very weak data come out of the US in the past week, and this has been over the last year, the US economic recovery has been the mainstay of the world economy. So if that begins to falter and stall, there's a real danger of the global economy sinking back into some kind of recession.
Jeremy Warner from the Daily Telegraph. Not so much Freud on the couch as Freud on the rack. The Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg has been strongly critical of the Welfare Reform Minister's comments about disabled people. He said there was a group which wasn't worth the full wage. Speaking on LBC Radio this morning, Nick Clegg acknowledged those comments were ill-judged.
I think what was so offensive to people about the remarks recorded at the Conservative Party conference that Lord Freud made was when he used this word worth. And he said, some people with disabilities weren't worth the minimum wage. And I think that is what's quite rightly touched a raw nerve, because it's kind of making a comment about someone's individual value, if you like, worth.
Lord Freud is to remain in his job after issuing a full and unreserved apology, but has been withdrawn from his duties in the House of Lords today. The whole row has highlighted the issue of unemployment amongst people with disabilities. Rob Curry was employed at the Remploy factory in Port Talbot, which gave employment to disabled people, until it was closed in 2013. He'd like to work and fears he's now seen by others as a benefit scrounger.
I've got heart disease, for which I've had a triple bypass, but I'm still having problems. In fact, I was in hospital last week with a bad angina attack. I've got herniation in my back between discs L4 and 5. I've got a monocular vision. I've lost my eye, and I'm diabetic. That's pretty much all my disabilities.
And you were working for a long time at the Remploy factory?
Yes, I was there approximately 14 years in Remploy. I'm finding it very, very difficult now, finding further employment.
Why do you think it's been so tough?
My personal opinion is the box on the tick box on the application form, which says, are you disabled, and then list your disabilities. I really do feel that although there's legislation about the discrimination of disabilities and other things, that if two people went for a job, one was able-bodied, one was disabled, there's no prizes for guessing who the prospective employer would pick.
Working's very important for everybody, isn't it? So I imagine it's been quite difficult for you since you left Remploy.
It's been very, very difficult, especially in the early months. I was getting up in the morning, Martha, and wondering, well, what am I going to do today? It's all very fine to have a week's holiday. It's very nice to have a fortnight's holiday, but it's always nice to get back into work. And to have a reason to get up in the morning, and also to feel that, and I know it's a cliche, but also to feel that I'm contributing something. But then all of a sudden to have the carpet pulled from underneath your feet, Martha, and have nothing, and gone from a worker earning wages, paying taxes, and overnight gone from a worker to a benefits scrounger, because that's what we're labelled on benefits. And this lie has been put out by the Conservatives, that we're benefit scroungers. There are plenty of offers of work out there, Martha, for what they call job tasters, where you go and work for somebody for anything up to 12 weeks for not even the minimum or £2 an hour, which Lord Freud is advocating, for your job seekers allowance. And then after that period is over, they decide whether they want to take you on or not. I don't know anybody that's been taken on after doing that yet.
As you know, there is a lot of discussion at the moment about what to do about unemployment amongst disabled people.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think about the argument that employers might be more willing to take on people with disabilities if they were able to pay lower than the minimum wage and possibly have that topped up by benefits?
Yes, in principle, I wouldn't be against that. In fact, the Welsh Assembly government has got a scheme running now where you went to work for somebody and they made up the wages, you know. No, I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. But I'm grossly offended by Lord Freud's remarks that we should be working for £2 an hour. And for him and his ilk to think that we're worth any less than anybody else I find grossly offensive.
Well, we contacted the Department for Work and Pensions for an interview with either Lord Freud himself or the Minister for the Disabled, but were told that none of them were available. Crime is down to its lowest level since the official survey began more than 3 decades ago. But in figures recorded by the police in England and Wales, rapes are at their highest official level. I've been speaking to our Home Affairs correspondent, Danny Shaw.
Well, according to the crime survey, there's been a 16% reduction compared to the same period the year before. And that's the lowest estimate since the survey began in 1981. And what we're seeing is a long-term reduction in crime, according to the survey figures, stretching back to the mid-1990s. And in some categories of crime, on the survey data, we're seeing large falls. Violence down 23%, for instance, criminal damage down 20%, and theft down by 12%.
But then in the case of rapes reported to and recorded by police in England and Wales, there's been a big rise there.
Yes, these are separate figures. These are the offences reported to police and recorded by police. And what we're seeing is the number of rapes at a record level, more than 22,000 in the year to the end of June. That's up 29% on the year before. And there are 2 key reasons for this, the statisticians tell us. One is because police have altered the methods about how they record rapes. There was a lot of criticism that they were chalking off allegations, so-called no criming. And secondly, it's a continuation of the so-called U-tree effect, people coming forward to report abuse after the Jimmy Savile scandal, although interestingly around 3/4 of the offences of rape that they are reporting are not historical allegations, they are recent allegations. And within the category of rape, there is a rise that the officials tell us is genuine. It's an increase in the number of rapes involving knives or sharp weapons. It's gone up by almost a half. And although the numbers themselves are small, that is a real concern, because if the officials are right and there's a genuine increase there, that's something that doesn't appear to have been understood as to why that's happening.
Danny Shaw. As politicians meet to discuss how to limit the spread of Ebola in Europe, what impact is the disease having on people from countries like Sierra Leone, who've made their lives here but still have ties to the country? Earlier today, our reporter Emma-Jane Kirby went to meet people in the UK's Sierra Leone community in London to find out how they're feeling the impact of Ebola far from home.
Christmas, they do this roadshow for this Ebola problem.
What do you do when you're thousands of miles away from your home country and you see your friends and family there caught up in the midst of a terrifying health crisis?
For we country,
For René Horton-Coker, there was only one choice: to call together everyone in the UK's Sierra Leone community and create a task force to coordinate support.
For the last 18 months, I've been working in both Liberia and Sierra Leone, and got back on the 4th of July and realised there was a desperate need for help in the country. And through colleagues and friends, we've sort of rallied round and created petitions and campaigns, A, to raise awareness, B, to raise funds, so that we can help our families and friends back home. There's a desperate need, there's an urgent need, and you feel that you have to and you must contribute, and that's how I've got involved.
For this disease, Like many of those on the task force, René's life has been personally hit by the Ebola crisis.
My niece, Georgia Brown. Georgia sadly died 3 weeks ago because of Ebola. She was a nurse at one of the hospitals, and her family, my sister, didn't realise that she had contracted the virus, and so tragically she died. So yes, I have, and I suppose you can tell from my voice, I have been tragically affected by this, and so many of us have been tragically affected by the whole situation.
My name is Mike Kamara. Ordinarily, I'm in the advisory and private equity space, but now most of my time is dedicated to this because I'm from Sierra Leone originally. The focus of the diaspora here has been threefold. Firstly, it was to encourage the deployment of military assets because we realized very quickly this could not be resolved without that. Secondly, it was to encourage volunteers. It's incredibly important that we get professional volunteers, medics and non-medics on the ground. Thirdly, it was around sensitization and education, both in the West and in our home countries.
You are listening to Voices from the Diaspora.
The Diaspora Task Force has even launched its own radio station, broadcast across Sierra Leone. It carries up-to-date health advice and even lessons for children whose schools have been shut in the effort to stop the spread of Ebola.
I have a very special announcement to make for you today.
Amifa Kebi-Kamara hopes such projects will offer some comfort to those back home.
Because on the ground people have to be in isolation, you don't even get the human assurance. You can't even hold somebody's hand and say, this is really bad. There isn't that community spirit. People have to stay, indoors, have to stay isolated. So there is a huge amount of fear.
Papa God, we ask for you can now this we meeting here. So
at the end of the meeting, prayers are said for those who are suffering. Some of Renee's family have been unable to return home to Sierra Leone because of the Ebola outbreak. Some of Maike's friends who have returned to the UK haven't received the warmest of welcomes.
Personally, I haven't encountered any hostility, but I have heard, especially from returning healthcare workers who are heading back into their workplace, that sometimes they are faced, if not hostility, with some doubts and apprehension by their colleagues.
But that must be incredibly painful for them, very difficult.
Well, from talking to them, difficult but understandable. I think they appreciate that the people are afraid. Our challenge is time. Ebola is a formidable foe. It is racing well ahead of us at this time. We are behind it, and the consequences could be there.
Amen.
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 That report by Emma Jane Kirby. To Sierra Leone itself now to find out how healthcare workers are coping with the pressures of a constant flow of patients. Indira Govenda is a South African doctor working in the Kai Laun Ebola Case Management Centre, which is run by Médecins Sans Frontières. She just stepped away from the emergency room to talk to us, so apologies for the slightly difficult line.
At the moment, we are receiving patients from across the country, and it's quite difficult to sometimes trace contacts of people who are coming from other districts. And then a lot of children that have lost parents who come here alone, that's quite emotionally challenging for them, and it's very difficult for our staff as well. And then, of course, the fact that we're not able to do as much as we would like to for the patients because of the infection control procedures and protocols. That's something that we all have to deal with on a constant basis.
And that must be very worrying for the healthcare workers, given the cases that we've heard of people who have become infected.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly the reason why we have to be quite cautious, and our safety is a priority. But it's not easy for nurses and doctors to just walk away without feeling responsible. We have ambulances that come every day, and they have to communicate with our medical team leader to find out how many beds we have available and if we can accommodate patients.
Do you have fears about the spread of Ebola?
If we don't find all the contacts and if we don't get to all the cases, then the disease is going to spread. It is spreading. We in the center haven't seen any decline in the numbers. We have a steady flow of patients every day.
Are you getting enough help from the international community?
In Kailahun, we have, this MSF is the only center that I know of that's here. We have the Red Cross that is doing some of the burial and body management, dead body management. I think the WHO is involved in contact tracing here. And I know that a couple of days ago there was a food distribution by the World Food Programme, but that's as much as I've seen.
Dr. Indira Govender. Well, let's talk now to Aminata Forna. She's a writer who was brought up in Sierra Leone and Britain. Her book, The Devil That Danced on the Water, is about her father, a finance minister of Sierra Leone, who was executed. And you think there are some misconceptions about the Ebola outbreak. You've talked about Western coverage being overblown.
Well, what's been very interesting about this crisis is the way that diaspora has stepped in to help. In a sense, we were already prepared by the experience of the war. I, for example, with my husband, run a small charitable trust. We set it up to help our community rebuild after the war, and we've been able to use those same systems and contacts to get help to them from the UK. Social media has been extraordinarily useful in putting out the call, first of all, for diaspora doctors to go back, and many have, like some of your interviewees in the package. I have friends who've gone back to help, gone back to try to deal with the crisis in huge numbers. And what's going on in the ground in individual communities? You see, a lot of us saw this happening before the main population of the UK was aware of it, because of social media, because we had mobile connections. I was able to talk to my cousin in a small village in the middle of Sierra Leone and really track this virus moving across the country at an extraordinary speed. I would have been going to Sierra Leone now on a family holiday. Back in July, we knew we would have to cancel. And we also knew that this was not going to be any better by Christmas, that the growth, the rate of infection was absolutely exponential. So I guess in a way, actually, the diaspora and people on the ground are ahead of the curve. And you know, we're just seeing enormous amounts of courage, really.
But what we're seeing is a health system there under huge pressure.
Well, you mentioned my father, who was a political activist, a political prisoner, in fact, for most of my life. He was also a medical doctor. And one of the things he foresaw was that when you destroy a country, you destroy everything. Sierra Leone's health system, which had been very good in the 60s, was destroyed during the Civil War. And that is why it simply has collapsed under the strain. It really never was fully functioning. I've written about it in the past. So it was never going to be able to cope. It seems strange to me that this couldn't have been foreseen. Certainly the medical staff foresaw it. Certainly Médecins Sans Frontières, who've been absolute heroes in this and have been working in Sierra Leone for some time, foresaw it. The three presidents of the nations affected have all said way back in July that they couldn't cope with this. Infrastructure simply isn't there, and it wasn't there to begin with. So it does seem baffling to me that the international community could be so slow. These kinds of viruses are not going to be localised problems. The world isn't like that anymore. It's highly populated. It's highly mobile. You simply can't say this is an African problem, let the Africans get on with it.
And while, as you described, that the health system being under such pressure, it must be very difficult for people who have other medical problems which aren't Ebola.
Well, as you say, we've all been affected by Ebola, or the knock-on in some way. A cousin of mine died in great pain from breast cancer because she couldn't get into a hospital to, get morphine relief for the end of her life. People who have malaria, which kills thousands each year, typhoid, all of these diseases, which normally would be very kind of high up the ranking for emergency treatment, are now having to be treated at home.
So what more do you think the international community should be doing?
Well, I think the lesson that's going to come out of this is the frustration of the response. It's a technical issue as much as a financial one. It's about systems that are probably going to have to be put in place before this happens again, wherever it happens again. The World Health Organization has created huge frustration, but they themselves, to be fair, are frustrated. I heard a spokeswoman some months ago saying we're not the magic bullet. They can't do everything. It's a coordination problem. And of course, it's a speed of response problem. And for whatever reason, nobody was on top of this from the start. But we're going to have to get a lot faster and move a lot faster.
Aminata Fauna, many thanks. And that brings us to today's closing headlines. While campaigning in the Rochester and Stroud by-election, David Cameron said further action was needed to control immigration. In the city a short time ago, the 100 share index was down 108 points at 6,103. This is Martha Carney, and that's The World at 1:45.
The editor was Fiona Leach. Studio direction was by Andrew Mills. Now, networking nation Julia Hobsbawm, a businesswoman who's made networking her personal passion and her professional living, takes us on a journey around different and surprising worlds of networks. In today's programme, she looks at the world of work.
There's a clue in the word networking to the subject of today's programme, and that, of course, is the word work. Most of us spend a staggering 10,000 days of our lives doing it during a typical career. There's no doubt in my mind that a better networked workplace and a better networked worker in that workplace helps everybody, the economy, the organisation and the individual. Why? Well, let's hear to begin with from a chief executive who came over to the Fortune Most Powerful Women Conference where she networks.
I'm the CEO and chairman of Arison